Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of becoming a nurse, but nothing could have prepared her for what she would face on Christmas Eve 2023. At 24 years old, she was still considered a rookie at San Diego General Hospital, having graduated from nursing school just 8 months earlier. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her scrubs were always perfectly pressed, reflecting the dedication she brought to her work every single day. The emergency department was unusually quiet that evening. Most of the staff had gathered around the small Christmas tree someone had set up in the break room, sharing leftover cookies and hot chocolate. Sarah volunteered to stay on the floor, partly because she was still the newest member of the team and partly because she genuinely enjoyed helping people, even on holidays. She walked through the empty corridors, checking on the few patients who remained in the hospital over Christmas. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall, which was rare for San Diego. The city looked peaceful and calm under the white blanket, with Christmas lights twinkling in windows and families gathering in warm homes. Sarah paused at one of the large windows in the hallway, watching the snowflakes dance in the yellow glow of the streetlights. She thought about her own family, probably finishing dinner right about now at her parents' house across town. Her peaceful moment was interrupted by the sharp sound of the emergency doors sliding open. Sarah turned to see two men stumbling through the entrance, both wearing dark clothing and looking extremely urgent. One was supporting the other, who appeared to be badly injured. The injured man was tall and muscular, with short brown hair and several days' worth of beard stubble. His companion was equally fit, with concerned eyes that darted around the emergency room as if checking for threats. Sarah immediately rushed toward them, her training taking over despite her relative inexperience. The injured man was bleeding heavily from what appeared to be a deep wound in his side, and his face was pale from blood loss. His breathing was shallow and rapid, classic signs of shock that Sarah had studied extensively but had never seen this severe in real life. "Please help him," the uninjured man said urgently. "He's lost a lot of blood, and we can't reach our usual medical contact." Sarah noticed something odd about the way both men carried themselves. Despite the emergency situation, they moved with a precision and awareness that seemed almost military. The injured man, even in his weakened state, kept his eyes alert and scanning the room. The other man positioned himself so he could watch both the entrance and the hallway leading deeper into the hospital. "What happened?" Sarah asked as she helped guide the injured man to the nearest examination room. She was trying to assess the situation while also calling for additional medical help. "Training accident," the uninjured man replied quickly. "We were doing some exercises in the mountains, and he fell onto some sharp rocks." Sarah noticed the hesitation in his voice and the way he avoided making direct eye contact when he spoke. Her instincts told her there was more to this story, but her immediate concern was the medical emergency in front of her. The injured man was beginning to show more serious signs of blood loss, including confusion and weakness. Dr. Patricia Williams, the senior emergency physician on duty, arrived within minutes of Sarah's call. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of dealing with medical emergencies. She took one look at the patient and immediately began barking orders for blood work, for fluids, and imaging studies. "Sarah, I need you to apply pressure to that wound while I examine him more thoroughly," Dr. Williams instructed. "And someone get me 4 units of O-negative blood from the blood bank immediately." As Sarah pressed gauze against the man's side, she felt the warmth of his blood seeping through the material. The wound was deeper than she had initially thought, and she could see that it would require immediate surgical intervention. What puzzled her, however, was the nature of the injury itself. The edges of the wound were clean and precise, almost as if they had been made by a very sharp blade rather than jagged rocks. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" Dr. Williams asked the patient as she checked his vital signs. The injured man looked up at her with surprisingly clear blue eyes, despite his obvious pain and blood loss. "Jake," he said simply. "Jake Thompson." Sarah noticed that his companion had moved to a position near the door where he could observe everyone who entered or left the room. When a security guard walked by in the hallway, the man's hand instinctively moved toward his jacket, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. These small details were adding up to create a picture that didn't quite match the training accident story they had been told. The blood work results came back quickly, showing that Jake had lost a dangerous amount of blood and was at risk of going into severe shock. His blood pressure was dropping steadily, and his heart rate was increasing as his body tried to compensate for the blood loss. Dr. Williams made the decision to take him into surgery immediately, but there was a problem. "We're going to need to operate right away," Dr. Williams explained to both men. "But our main operating room is being deep cleaned after an earlier emergency surgery, and it won't be ready for at least 2 hours. The backup surgical suite has been having electrical problems all week." Sarah watched as Jake's companion stepped forward with an expression of genuine worry. "Doctor, is there anything else you can do? Anything at all? We can't wait 2 hours." Dr. Williams looked frustrated and concerned. She had been practicing emergency medicine for over 20 years, and she knew that Jake didn't have 2 hours to wait. His condition was deteriorating rapidly, and, without immediate intervention, he could go into irreversible shock or worse. "There might be one option," Dr. Williams said slowly, thinking through the possibilities. "We have a small procedure room that we sometimes use for minor surgeries. It's not ideal, and it doesn't have all the equipment of a full operating room, but it might work if we can improvise some solutions." Sarah found herself speaking up, surprising herself with her boldness. "Dr. Williams, I studied emergency field medicine as part of my nursing program. I know it's not the same as a full surgical suite, but maybe there are some techniques we could adapt." Dr. Williams looked at Sarah with surprise and, then, consideration. She had noticed that the young nurse showed unusual initiative and problem-solving skills, but this was a life-or-death situation that required experience and expertise. "Sarah, this would be extremely challenging even for an experienced surgical team," Dr. Williams said carefully. "We would be working with minimal equipment and improvised tools. Are you sure you're prepared for something like this?" Sarah looked at Jake, who was now struggling to stay conscious. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and she could see that his breathing was becoming more labored. Something about his situation touched her deeply, not just as a medical professional but as a person who had dedicated her life to helping others. "I'm ready, Dr. Williams," Sarah said with more confidence than she actually felt. "Tell me what you need me to do." As they prepared to move Jake to the small procedure room, his companion pulled Sarah aside. "Nurse, I need you to know that Jake is a good man who has spent his life serving his country. He saved more lives than I can count, and he deserves every chance we can give him." Sarah looked into the man's eyes and saw genuine friendship and loyalty there. She also noticed that he referred to Jake as someone who served his country, which made her wonder if her suspicions about their military background were correct. "We're going to do everything we can for him," Sarah promised. "But I need you to be completely honest with me about what happened. The more we know about his injury, the better we can treat him." The man hesitated for a long moment, clearly wrestling with some internal conflict. Finally, he spoke in a low voice that only Sarah could hear. "Jake is a Navy SEAL," he said quietly. "We were on a mission that went bad, and he was injured by enemy fire. We can't go through normal military medical channels right now because the mission was classified, and there are people who might try to find us here." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had suspected that these men were military, but learning that Jake was a Navy SEAL made the situation even more intense. She had read about SEALs and knew that they were among the most elite and highly trained warriors in the world. The fact that Jake was injured while serving his country made her even more determined to save his life. "Thank you for telling me the truth," Sarah said. "That information could be important for his treatment. Don't worry about anything else right now. Just focus on the fact that we're going to take good care of him." As they wheeled Jake into the small procedure room, Sarah realized that she was about to face the biggest challenge of her young nursing career. The room was cramped and poorly equipped compared to a real operating room. The lighting was adequate but not ideal, and many of the tools they would normally use for this type of surgery simply weren't available. Dr. Williams had called in Dr. Michael Chen, a surgeon who had been finishing his Christmas Eve dinner at home when he received the emergency call. Dr. Chen was known for his skill and creativity in difficult situations, but even he looked concerned when he saw the limitations they would be working with. "This is going to require some very creative problem solving," Dr. Chen said as he examined Jake's wound more closely. "The injury has damaged several major blood vessels, and we're going to need to repair them with very limited resources." Sarah began setting up the available equipment, her hands moving efficiently despite the nervousness she felt inside. She had trained for situations like this in nursing school, but the reality was much more intense than any simulation or textbook could convey. The smell of blood and antiseptic filled the small room, and the steady beeping of the heart monitor provided a constant reminder of how critical Jake's condition had become. As Dr. Chan and Dr. Williams scrubbed in for the procedure, Sarah noticed that some of the essential surgical instruments were either missing or damaged. The delicate forceps they would need to repair blood vessels were nowhere to be found, and the specialized clamps that would normally be used to control bleeding were not available in the procedure room. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said hesitantly, "some of the instruments we need aren't here. Should I try to get them from the main surgical suite?" Dr. Chen shook his head grimly. "There isn't time. Jake's blood pressure is dropping too fast. We need to start the procedure now, or we might lose him." Sarah felt a moment of panic as she realized the full scope of the challenge they were facing. They were about to attempt a complex surgical procedure with inadequate tools and equipment, and a man's life hung in the balance. She thought about her training and tried to remember if there were any alternative techniques or tools that could be used in emergency situations. Then, she remembered something from her emergency medicine coursework. In field conditions, military medics and emergency responders sometimes had to improvise surgical tools from whatever materials were available. She had studied cases where broken glass, carefully prepared and sterilized, had been used as makeshift scalpels when proper surgical instruments weren't available. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "what if we could improvise some of the tools we need? I remember reading about emergency procedures where non-traditional materials were used successfully." Dr. Chen looked at her with interest. "What did you have in mind, Sarah?" Sarah pointed to a glass cabinet that had been damaged earlier in the day when a piece of equipment had fallen against it. Several pieces of broken glass lay on the floor, including some that had broken into relatively long, thin pieces with sharp edges. "If we could sterilize some of that glass properly," Sarah said, "we might be able to use it as precision instruments for the delicate work on the blood vessels. The edges are incredibly sharp, and, with careful handling, they could work better than some of the makeshift tools we have available." Dr. Williams and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. The suggestion was unconventional and risky, but they were facing an impossible situation with conventional tools. Jake's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and creative solutions might be their only hope. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said seriously, "that's an extremely dangerous proposition. Working with broken glass in a surgical setting goes against every safety protocol we have. If something goes wrong, we could cause more damage than we prevent." Sarah understood the risks, but she also understood that doing nothing was not an option. Jake's breathing was becoming increasingly shallow, and the monitor showed that his vital signs were approaching critical levels. They had perhaps minutes before his condition would become irreversible. "I know it's dangerous, Dr. Chen," Sarah said, "but I've been studying the theoretical applications of improvised surgical tools. If we can select the right pieces of glass and prepare them properly, they might give us the precision we need to save Jake's life." Dr. Williams stepped forward. "Sarah, if we're going to try this, we need to be absolutely certain about the sterilization process and the technique for handling the glass safely. One mistake could be catastrophic." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was a rookie nurse who was suggesting a highly unconventional and risky procedure, but she was also the person who might have the knowledge and skills needed to save Jake's life. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the sound of Jake's labored breathing. Everyone present understood that they were at a critical decision point. They could wait for proper equipment and likely watch Jake die, or they could take an enormous risk with an improvised solution that might either save his life or make his condition worse. As Sarah looked at Jake's pale face and saw the trust in his eyes, even in his semi-conscious state, she knew that they had to try everything possible to save him. This was why she had become a nurse, to help people in their most desperate moments, even when the solutions weren't found in textbooks or standard procedures. The next few minutes would determine whether her unconventional idea would lead to a miracle of emergency medicine or a tragic reminder of the dangers of improvisation in life or death situations. Dr. Chen took a deep breath and made the decision that would change everything. Sarah, if you're confident about this technique, then we're going to trust your knowledge. But we do this exactly by the book that you learned, and at the first sign of complications, we stop immediately. Sarah felt her heart pounding as she moved toward the broken glass. The pieces were scattered across the floor near the damaged cabinet, and she needed to select the ones that would be most suitable for delicate surgical work. She remembered her professor explaining that the ideal improvised cutting tool would be thin, sharp, and have a stable edge that wouldn't fragment under pressure. I need everyone to give me some space while I prepare these, Sarah said, kneeling carefully beside the glass. Dr. Williams, could you please prepare the strongest antiseptic solution we have? We're going to need to sterilize these pieces more thoroughly than anything we've ever sterilized before. Jake's companion, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. Is there anything I can do to help? I have some experience with field medicine myself. Sarah looked up at him, noticing for the first time the small scars on his hands and arms that suggested he had indeed seen combat situations. What's your name? And, yes, I could use your help. Marcus, he replied simply. Marcus Rodriguez. I've been Jake's partner for 3 years, and I've seen him patch up more wounds than most doctors. Dr. Chen was monitoring Jake's vital signs while Sarah worked with the glass. His blood pressure is continuing to drop. Sarah, how much more time do you need? Just 2 more minutes, Sarah replied, carefully examining a long, thin piece of glass that had broken at an almost perfect angle. The shard was about 4 inches long and tapered to an extremely sharp point. With proper preparation, it could work like a precision scalpel for the delicate work they needed to do on Jake's damaged blood vessels. Sarah held the glass piece up to the light, checking for any cracks or weak points that could cause it to break during the procedure. The glass appeared to be solid and stable, with a cutting edge that was actually sharper than many surgical instruments. She selected 2 more pieces that could serve as backup tools, then carefully placed all 3 on a sterile towel. Dr. Williams, I need you to help me create a double sterilization process, Sarah explained as she worked. We'll use both chemical sterilization and heat treatment to make sure these glass pieces are completely free of bacteria and contamination. Dr. Williams had filled a metal basin with the hospital's strongest antiseptic solution. Sarah, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about the safety of this technique? We're in uncharted territory here. Sarah understood the doctor's concerns, but she also understood that conventional approaches weren't available to them. Jake's breathing had become even more labored, and the monitors showed that his heart rate was increasing dangerously as his body struggled to compensate for blood loss. Dr. Williams, I studied this technique as part of a special course on disaster medicine, Sarah explained while carefully lowering the glass pieces into the antiseptic solution. The professor who taught it was a former military doctor who had used similar methods in combat zones where proper surgical equipment wasn't available. The key is absolute precision in the sterilization process and extremely careful handling during the procedure. Marcus stepped closer, watching Sarah's methodical preparation with obvious respect. Nurse Sarah, I've seen military medics do incredible things with very little equipment. If you believe this can work, then Jake believes it too. He's always said that the best medical professionals are the ones who can think outside the box when lives are on the line. Dr. Chen was now looking increasingly worried about Jake's condition. His systolic blood pressure just dropped below 90. We need to start this procedure immediately, or we're going to lose him. Sarah removed the glass pieces from the antiseptic solution and carefully placed them on a sterile heating pad that would complete the sterilization process. While they heated, she began preparing the surgical site on Jake's abdomen. The wound was even more serious than she had initially realized, with damage to at least 3 major blood vessels that would require extremely delicate repair work. Jake, Sarah said softly, leaning close to his ear, we're going to take very good care of you. I need you to stay with us and keep fighting. Jake's eyes opened slightly, and he managed to focus on Sarah's face. Despite his pain and weakness, she could see the strength and determination that had made him a Navy SEAL. "Thank you," he whispered. "Do whatever you have to do." The trust in his voice made Sarah even more determined to succeed. She had never faced a challenge like this in her short nursing career, but she knew that this was exactly the kind of situation she had trained for. Emergency medicine often required quick thinking and creative solutions, and this was her opportunity to put everything she had learned into practice. Dr. Chen began the procedure by making the initial incision to expose the damaged blood vessels. The wound was even more complex than the imaging had suggested, with multiple torn vessels that would need individual attention. Using conventional tools, this would be a challenging surgery even in a fully equipped operating room. "Sarah, hand me the first glass instrument," Dr. Chen said, his voice steady despite the unusual nature of the request. Sarah carefully picked up the longest glass piece, holding it like a scalpel but with extra attention to her grip and the angle of approach. The glass felt different from a metal instrument, lighter but somehow more precise in its balance. She passed it to Dr. Chen handle first, making sure that both of their hands were positioned safely away from the sharp edges. Dr. Chen accepted the improvised tool with obvious caution, but as he began to use it, his expression changed to one of surprise and growing confidence. The glass edge was incredibly sharp and allowed for more precise cutting than many of the backup instruments they had available in the procedure room. "This is actually working better than I expected," Dr. Chen murmured as he carefully separated damaged tissue from healthy blood vessels. "The edge is sharp enough to make very clean cuts without causing additional trauma to the surrounding tissue." Sarah felt a rush of relief and pride as she watched the improvised tool perform exactly as she had hoped. Her theoretical knowledge was proving to be applicable in the real world, and Jake's life might be saved because of her willingness to think creatively under pressure. Dr. Williams was monitoring Jake's vital signs and managing the anesthesia. "His blood pressure has stabilized for now, but he's still in critical condition. How much more time do you need?" "We're making good progress," Dr. Chen replied, using the glass instrument to carefully expose the first damaged blood vessel. "Sarah, I'm going to need this second piece of glass for the vessel repair work. The precision required for that part of the procedure is going to be extreme." Sarah prepared the second glass piece, which was slightly shorter and had an even finer point. This piece would be used for the most delicate part of the surgery, actually repairing the torn blood vessels that were causing Jake's life-threatening bleeding. As Dr. Chen worked, Sarah found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. If she hadn't volunteered to work on Christmas Eve, if she hadn't been willing to suggest an unconventional solution, if she hadn't remembered her disaster medicine training, any one of those factors could have changed the outcome of this night. Marcus was watching the procedure with intense focus, occasionally providing information about Jake's medical history that helped the doctors make better decisions about his care. It was clear that the two SEALs had been through many dangerous situations together and had developed the kind of trust that only comes from depending on each other for survival. "Jake's been shot twice before," Marcus told Dr. Chen quietly. "Once in Afghanistan and once during a training exercise that went wrong. Both times, he recovered completely and was back to full duty within a few months. He's one of the strongest people I've ever known." Sarah was struck by the realization that this wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a moment that could determine whether a genuine American hero would survive to continue serving his country. The weight of that responsibility was both inspiring and terrifying. Dr. Chen was now using the glass instrument to begin the actual repair of Jake's blood vessels. This was the most critical part of the entire procedure, requiring steady hands and absolute precision. One mistake could cause additional bleeding that might be impossible to control with their limited resources. "Sarah, I need you to provide suction right here," Dr. Chen instructed, indicating a spot where blood was beginning to pool around the surgical site. "And be ready to hand me the third glass piece if I need it for backup." Sarah positioned the suction device carefully, working around Dr. Chen's hands as he manipulated the improvised surgical tool. She could see that the glass was performing flawlessly, allowing him to make repairs that would have been much more difficult with the blunter backup instruments they had available. The first blood vessel repair was completed successfully, with Dr. Chen using tiny stitches to close the tear in the vessel wall. The bleeding from that area stopped immediately, which was an encouraging sign that the repair would hold under pressure. "One down, 2 to go," Dr. Chen said with satisfaction. "Sarah, your improvised tools are working better than some of the expensive instruments I've used in major hospitals. Where exactly did you learn about this technique?" Sarah continued to assist while explaining her background. "I took an elective course in disaster medicine during my final semester of nursing school. The professor was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, who had served as a military doctor in Iraq and Afghanistan. She taught us that in emergency situations, medical professionals have to be ready to improvise solutions using whatever materials are available." Dr. Williams was impressed by Sarah's quick thinking and thorough preparation. "Sarah, I have to say that your initiative tonight has been extraordinary. Most nurses with your level of experience would never have thought to suggest something like this, let alone have the knowledge to implement it safely." As Dr. Chen moved on to the second damaged blood vessel, Sarah reflected on how much her confidence had grown over the course of the evening. When Jake and Marcus had first arrived, she had been a nervous rookie nurse who was uncertain about her abilities. Now she was actively participating in a life-saving procedure that required creativity, skill, and courage. The second blood vessel repair proved to be more challenging than the first. The tear was larger and more complex, requiring multiple small stitches and extremely careful handling of the surrounding tissue. Dr. Chen worked slowly and methodically, using the glass instrument to make precise cuts and adjustments. "This is like doing microsurgery with makeshift tools," Dr. Chen commented as he worked. "Sarah, the sharpness of this glass is actually an advantage in this situation. It's allowing me to make cleaner cuts than I could with some of our duller backup instruments." Marcus had been standing quietly in the corner, but now he stepped forward with a concerned expression. "Doctor, I hate to interrupt, but I need to let you know that we can't stay here much longer. There are people looking for us, and if they track us to this hospital, it could put everyone here in danger." Dr. Chen paused in his work and looked at Marcus seriously. "How much time do we have?" "Maybe an hour, possibly less," Marcus replied. "Jake and I were part of a classified mission that went wrong, and there are people who would prefer that we don't make it back to report what we saw." Sarah felt a chill as she realized that their medical emergency was taking place in the middle of what sounded like a dangerous military or intelligence situation. She had thought that the hardest part would be performing improvised surgery, but now it seemed like they were also racing against time to avoid some kind of threat. "Then, we need to work faster," Dr. Chen said, returning his attention to Jake's surgery. "Sarah, I'm going to need you to anticipate my needs even more than you have been. We can't afford any delays or mistakes." The second blood vessel repair was completed successfully, with the bleeding stopping as soon as Dr. Chen finished the final stitches. Jake's blood pressure immediately began to improve, showing that the surgery was having the desired effect on his overall condition. "His vital signs are looking much better," Dr. Williams reported. "Blood pressure is rising, and his heart rate is beginning to stabilize. Whatever we're doing, it's working." Sarah felt a surge of hope and pride as she realized that their unconventional approach was actually saving Jake's life. The improvised glass instruments had performed flawlessly, and Dr. Chen's surgical skill had turned her theoretical knowledge into practical success. The third and final blood vessel repair was the most challenging of all. The damage was located in a difficult position that required Dr. Chen to work at an awkward angle with limited visibility. He had to rely on touch and experience as much as sight to guide the delicate repair work. "Sarah, I need you to hold this retractor at exactly this angle, Dr. Chen instructed. "It's going to give me just enough visibility to complete the final repair." Sarah positioned the retractor carefully, using her knowledge of anatomy to provide the best possible exposure for Dr. Chen's work. She could see that he was working with incredible precision, using the sharp glass instrument to make tiny, careful cuts and adjustments. As Dr. Chen worked on the final repair, Sarah found herself thinking about how this experience was changing her perspective on nursing and medicine. She had always known that healthcare could involve life or death decisions, but she had never imagined being personally responsible for developing a solution that could mean the difference between life and death for a patient. The final stitches were completed, and Dr. Chen carefully set down the glass instrument. All 3 damaged blood vessels had been successfully repaired, and Jake's bleeding had stopped completely. His vital signs were showing steady improvement, indicating that the surgery had been a complete success. "We did it," Dr. Chen said with obvious relief and satisfaction. "Sarah, your improvised instruments worked perfectly. This is going to be one of the most unusual surgical success stories I've ever been part of." Sarah felt tears of relief and joy beginning to form in her eyes. They had actually succeeded in saving Jake's life using broken glass and creative problem solving. It was the kind of medical miracle that she had read about in textbooks but never imagined she would be personally involved in creating. As Dr. Chen finished closing the surgical site with conventional sutures, Jake's eyes began to flutter open more frequently. His breathing had improved dramatically, and the color was slowly returning to his face. The monitors showed that his vital signs were approaching normal ranges for the first time since his arrival at the hospital. "Jake, can you hear me?" Sarah asked softly, leaning over so he could see her face clearly. Jake's blue eyes focused on Sarah with increasing clarity. Did you save me?" he asked in a weak but steady voice. "You're going to be fine," Sarah replied, unable to hide the emotion in her voice. "The surgery was successful, and you're already getting stronger." Marcus stepped up to Jake's bedside with obvious relief and gratitude. "Brother, you scared me there for a while. I thought I was going to have to explain to your mom why I brought you home in pieces." Jake managed a weak smile. "Takes more than a little knife wound to keep a seal down. But, seriously, thank you all. I know this wasn't a standard procedure." Dr. Chen was cleaning and disposing of the improvised glass instruments with the same care he would use for expensive surgical tools. "Jake, you should know that Nurse Sarah here came up with the solution that saved your life. Without her quick thinking and knowledge of emergency techniques, we might not have been able to help you." Jake turned his attention to Sarah with a new expression of respect and gratitude. "Sarah, is it? I owe you my life. That's not something I take lightly." Sarah felt embarrassed by the attention but also proud of what they had accomplished together. "I was just doing my job, Jake. Any nurse would have done the same thing." "No," Jake said firmly, despite his weakened condition. "Any nurse would have followed standard procedures and waited for proper equipment. You thought outside the box and took a risk to save a stranger's life. That's something special." Dr. Williams was reviewing Jake's post-surgical vital signs and making notes in his medical chart. "We're going to need to keep you here for observation for at least 24 hours, she told Jake. "The surgery was successful, but we need to make sure there are no complications as you recover." Marcus looked concerned about this news. "Doctor, I explained earlier that we have some time constraints. There are people looking for us, and staying in one place for too long could be dangerous for everyone involved." Dr. Williams understood the implication but also knew her medical responsibilities. "I can't in good conscience discharge a patient this soon after major surgery. If there are security concerns, perhaps we can arrange for protection or move Jake to a more secure location within the hospital." Sarah found herself speaking up again, surprising herself with her continued boldness. "What if we set up a private recovery area where Jake could rest safely while still receiving proper medical monitoring? I could stay with him to watch for any complications." Dr. Chen considered this suggestion carefully. "Sarah, that would mean taking personal responsibility for a patient's postoperative care. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" Sarah looked at Jake, then at Marcus, and, finally, at the doctors who had trusted her judgment throughout the evening. She realized that this night had changed her fundamentally as a medical professional. She was no longer the uncertain rookie nurse who had started her shift a few hours earlier. "Dr. Chen, tonight I helped save a man's life using broken glass and emergency techniques I learned in school," Sarah said with growing confidence. "I think I can handle monitoring his recovery in a secure location." Jake was listening to this conversation with obvious interest, despite his fatigue from the surgery and blood loss. "Sarah, if you're willing to take care of me during recovery, I would be honored to have you as my nurse. But I need you to understand that being around Marcus and me might put you in some danger." Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty as she considered the implications of what Jake was telling her. She was a nurse, not a soldier, and she had no experience with dangerous military or intelligence situations. But she also felt a strong sense of responsibility for Jake's continued care and a growing personal investment in his recovery. "What kind of danger are we talking about?" Sarah asked, looking between Jake and Marcus. Marcus answered her question with obvious reluctance. "Sarah, Jake and I were part of a mission to gather intelligence on a terrorist cell that was planning attacks on American military bases overseas. We discovered information that certain people would kill to keep secret, and our extraction from the mission went wrong." Dr. Williams interrupted this conversation with a concerned expression. "I need to stop you right there. If this hospital is potentially at risk because of your presence here, I have a responsibility to protect our staff and other patients." Jake struggled to sit up slightly, wincing from pain but speaking with determination. "Dr. Williams, I give you my word as a Navy SEAL that we will not bring danger to this hospital or anyone in it. If Sarah is willing to help with my recovery in a secure location away from here, we can be gone within the hour." Sarah realized that she was at another crucial decision point. She could stay with her normal duties at the hospital, proud of her role in saving Jake's life but returning to her routine as a rookie nurse. Or she could take a much bigger risk and continue to be involved in a situation that was clearly more complex and dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. "Where would we go?" Sarah asked, surprising herself by using the word "we" instead of "you." Marcus looked at her with respect and concern. "Sarah, there's a safe house about an hour outside the city where Jake can recover without putting anyone else at risk. It's equipped with basic medical supplies, and I have training in field medicine to assist with his care. But having a trained nurse would be much safer for Jake's recovery," Dr. Chen added. "The surgery was successful, but there's always a risk of complications in the first 24 hours after an operation like this." Sarah thought about her options. She could stay at the hospital, safe and secure in her familiar environment. Or she could take an enormous risk to ensure that Jake received the best possible care during his recovery. She thought about why she had become a nurse in the first place, to help people who needed her most. "I'll go," Sarah said decisively. "Jake needs proper medical care, and if I can provide that in a safe location, then that's what I should do." Jake looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Sarah, are you absolutely sure about this? Once you leave the hospital with us, you become involved in a situation that could have serious consequences." Sarah nodded firmly. "I'm sure. You risked your life serving our country, and you were injured in the line of duty. The least I can do is make sure you get the medical care you need to recover completely." Dr. Williams and Dr. Chen exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about allowing Sarah to leave the hospital with two men involved in what sounded like a dangerous military situation. But they also understood that Jake's medical needs were real and that Sarah might be his best chance for a full recovery. "Sarah, if you're going to do this, you need to take a complete medical kit with supplies for post-operative care," Dr. Williams said. "And you need to understand that once you leave this hospital, you're on your own medically. We can't provide backup or support if complications arise." Dr. Chen was already gathering medical supplies that Sarah would need for Jake's continued care. "I'm putting together antibiotics, pain medications, wound care supplies, and equipment for monitoring his vital signs. Sarah, you'll need to check his blood pressure, temperature, and surgical site every few hours." As the doctors prepared Jake for transport, Sarah went to gather her personal belongings and change out of her hospital scrubs. She put on jeans, a warm sweater, and comfortable shoes, trying to prepare herself for an unknown situation in an unfamiliar location. When she returned to the procedure room, she found Jake sitting up on the edge of the examination table, looking much stronger than he had even an hour earlier. The color had returned to his face, and his eyes were clear and alert. Marcus was helping him put on a clean shirt, moving carefully to avoid disturbing the surgical site. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, automatically moving to check Jake's pulse and examine the surgical area. "Much better, thanks to you," Jake replied. "The pain is manageable, and I feel like my strength is returning." your glass surgery technique worked perfectly. Sarah carefully examined the surgical site and was pleased to see that there was no signs of bleeding or infection. The incision was healing well, and Jake's vital signs were all within normal ranges. She felt confident that he was stable enough for transport to the safe house. "Jake, I need to give you strict instructions for your recovery," Sarah said in her most professional voice. "No heavy lifting, no sudden movements, and absolutely no strenuous activity for at least 2 weeks. The surgical repairs need time to heal completely." Jake smiled at her serious tone. "Yes, ma'am. I promise to be a model patient." Marcus had been monitoring the hospital corridors and now returned with an update. "The area looks clear, and I have a vehicle waiting in the back parking lot. We should move soon if we're going to avoid any potential problems." Dr. Williams approached with a final medical report and instructions for Jake's care. "Sarah, I'm going to give you my personal cell phone number. If there are any complications or if you have any concerns about Jake's recovery, call me immediately. Day or night, I want to know if he needs additional medical attention." As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She was about to embark on an adventure that was completely outside her experience as a nurse, but she was also confident that she was making the right decision. Jake needed her medical expertise, and she was determined to see his recovery through to completion. Jake stood up slowly, testing his stability and pain levels. "I think I'm ready to go." "Sarah, are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah looked at Jake's determined face and thought about everything that had happened over the past few hours. She had saved a man's life using broken glass and creative thinking. She had worked successfully with experienced doctors on a complex surgical procedure. She had discovered strengths and abilities that she didn't know she possessed. "Jake, tonight has shown me what I'm really capable of as a nurse," Sarah said. "I'm not going to stop taking care of you now just because the location is changing." Marcus led them through a series of back corridors and service elevators to avoid the main hospital areas. The building was quiet except for the distant sounds of medical equipment and the soft voices of night shift staff. Sarah carried the medical supply kit that Dr. Chen had prepared, along with her personal belongings in a small bag. They reached a service exit that opened onto a parking lot behind the hospital. The snow was still falling lightly, and the air was cold and crisp. Marcus pointed to a dark SUV parked near the edge of the lot, running with its lights off. "That's our ride," Marcus explained. "Jake, do you think you can make it to the vehicle without assistance?" Jake took a few careful steps, moving slowly but steadily. "I'm okay. The surgery really did fix everything." "Sarah, your improvised technique was better than some operations I've had in military hospitals." As they walked across the parking lot, Sarah realized that she was leaving behind everything familiar and safe in her life. Her apartment, her routine at the hospital, her predictable existence as a new nurse, all of that was being replaced by an unknown adventure with a Navy SEAL and his partner in what sounded like a potentially dangerous situation. But she also realized that she had never felt more alive or more confident in her abilities. Tonight had shown her that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they reached the SUV, Marcus opened the back door for Jake and Sarah. "The safe house is about an hour's drive into the mountains. It's isolated and secure, with everything we need for Jake's recovery." Sarah helped Jake settle into the back seat, making sure he was comfortable and that his surgical site wasn't being stressed by the movement. She then climbed in beside him, placing the medical kit within easy reach in case Jake needed any attention during the drive. Marcus got behind the wheel and started the engine. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Sarah looked back at San Diego General Hospital, wondering when she would see it again. The building looked peaceful and normal in the falling snow, showing no signs of the dramatic medical emergency that had taken place there just hours earlier. "Sarah," Jake said quietly as they drove through the empty streets, "I want you to know that what you did tonight goes far beyond normal nursing duties. You saved my life, and you're continuing to risk your own safety to make sure I recover properly. That kind of dedication and courage is rare in any profession." Sarah felt a warm sense of pride and purpose as Jake spoke. She had always wanted to make a difference as a nurse, but she had never imagined that her first real test would involve such extraordinary circumstances. "Jake, tonight has taught me that being a nurse means being ready for anything," Sarah replied. "I'm honored to be part of your recovery, whatever that involves." As they drove into the mountains toward an uncertain but adventure-filled future, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few hours. She was no longer a nervous rookie nurse. She was a confident medical professional who had proven herself capable of handling extreme situations with creativity, skill, and courage. The safe house was located in a remote mountain valley about 90 minutes outside San Diego. As Marcus drove through winding mountain roads covered with fresh snow, Sarah could see that they were entering an area that was completely isolated from civilization. The only lights visible were their headlights cutting through the darkness and the occasional glow of a distant house tucked away in the forest. "How much further?" Sarah asked, checking Jake's pulse and temperature as they drove. His vital signs remained stable, but she wanted to get him settled in a proper recovery environment as soon as possible. "Just over the next ridge," Marcus replied. "The house belongs to a friend who lets us use it for situations like this. It's completely off the grid and secure from any kind of surveillance or tracking." Jake was resting with his eyes closed, but Sarah could tell he was awake and alert. Despite his injury and the stress of the evening, he maintained the kind of situational awareness that she was beginning to recognize as a characteristic of military special forces personnel. "Jake, how's your pain level?" Sarah asked, automatically checking his surgical site for any signs of bleeding or swelling. "Manageable," Jake replied, opening his eyes to look at her. "The local anesthetic is wearing off, but it's not unbearable. I've had worse injuries in training exercises." Sarah was impressed by Jake's tolerance for pain and his matter-of-fact attitude about his injury. She was beginning to understand that Navy SEALs were trained to function under extreme physical and mental stress, and that Jake's calm demeanor was the result of years of preparation for situations like this. As they crested the final ridge, Sarah could see a small cabin nestled among tall pine trees, with warm light glowing in the windows. The building looked rustic but well-maintained, with a stone chimney releasing a thin stream of smoke into the cold mountain air. A generator was humming quietly somewhere behind the building, providing electricity to the isolated location. Marcus pulled the SUV up to the cabin's front door and turned off the engine. "Welcome to our temporary home," he said. "It's not much to look at, but it has everything we need, including a decent medical setup in case of emergencies." Sarah helped Jake out of the vehicle, moving slowly and carefully to avoid putting stress on his surgical repair. Jake was able to walk steadily, but she could see that he was becoming fatigued from the combination of blood loss, surgery, and the long drive. The interior of the cabin was much more sophisticated than Sarah had expected. While it maintained a rustic mountain appearance, it was equipped with modern communications equipment, medical supplies, and comfortable furnishings. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable couches, and a dining area. A small but well-equipped kitchen was visible through an archway. "This place is amazing," Sarah commented as she looked around. "Who owns it?" Marcus was helping Jake settle onto one of the couches. "A retired military doctor who specializes in treating special operations personnel. He set it up as a place where people like Jake could recover from injuries without going through official military medical channels." Sarah could see the wisdom of having such a location available. Military special operations often involved classified missions and situations where normal medical treatment might compromise security or put people at risk. This cabin provided a safe alternative that combined medical capabilities with complete privacy. "Let me show you the medical area," Marcus said, leading Sarah to a room off the main living space. The room was equipped with a hospital-style bed, monitoring equipment, and a comprehensive selection of medical supplies and medications. It was essentially a small but complete medical clinic. "This is incredible," Sarah said, examining the equipment. "We have everything here that Jake might need for a complete recovery." Marcus was obviously proud of the setup. Dr. Richardson, the doctor who owns this place, made sure it could handle everything from minor injuries to major surgical recovery. He's treated SEALs, Delta Force operators, and other special ops personnel here for over 10 years. Sarah began setting up the medical monitoring equipment while Jake settled into the hospital bed. She attached monitors for his heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels, then checked his temperature and examined his surgical site. Everything looked excellent, with no signs of complications from the surgery or the travel. "Jake, your recovery is progressing perfectly," Sarah reported. "The surgical site looks clean and healthy, and all your vital signs are back to normal ranges. Dr. Chen did excellent work, even with our improvised tools." Jake smiled at her professional assessment. "Sarah, I have to ask, how did you end up knowing so much about emergency medical techniques? Most nurses with your experience wouldn't have been able to handle tonight's situation." Sarah sat down in a chair beside Jake's bed, thinking about how to answer his question. "I've always been interested in disaster medicine and emergency situations. During nursing school, I took every elective course I could find on field medicine, combat injuries, and improvised medical techniques. I never imagined I would actually need to use that knowledge." Marcus was setting up a security system that would monitor the approaches to the cabin. "Sarah, your knowledge probably saved Jake's life tonight. In our line of work, we sometimes have to rely on people who can think creatively under pressure. You proved that you're definitely one of those people." As Sarah prepared medications for Jake's continued care, she found herself thinking about how dramatically her life had changed in less than 12 hours. That morning, she had been a rookie nurse worried about making mistakes on routine patient care. Now she was providing post-operative medical care to a Navy SEAL in a secret mountain safe house. "Jake, can you tell me more about what happened on your mission?" Sarah asked. "I understand if it's classified, but it might help me provide better medical care if I understand how you were injured." Jake exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded slightly. "Sarah, you've earned the right to know what you're involved in. But you need to understand that this information is extremely sensitive and potentially dangerous." Sarah set down the medical chart she was updating and gave Jake her full attention. She realized that she was about to learn details about classified military operations that very few civilians ever heard. "Marcus and I were part of a team sent to gather intelligence on a terrorist cell operating out of a compound in Syria," Jake explained. "Our mission was to confirm that they were planning attacks on American military bases and to gather evidence that could be used to stop them." Sarah listened with fascination and growing concern as Jake described a world of international terrorism and covert military operations that was completely foreign to her experience as a nurse. "The mission went perfectly for the first 3 days," Jake continued. "We gathered extensive intelligence on the terrorist cells' plans, including details of specific attacks they were planning. But, on the final night, our extraction went wrong." Marcus picked up the story from there. "We were supposed to be picked up by helicopter at a predetermined location, but the terrorist cell had discovered our presence and set up an ambush. The helicopter took heavy fire and had to abort the extraction." Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of the danger that Jake and Marcus had faced. "So you were trapped behind enemy lines with hostile forces looking for you?" "Exactly," Jake said. "We had to make our way to an alternative extraction point on foot, traveling through enemy territory while carrying the intelligence we had gathered. It was during that movement that I was injured." Sarah could see that recounting these events was difficult for Jake, not because of physical pain but because of the intensity of the memories. She was getting a glimpse into the kind of life-or-death situations that special operations personnel faced on a regular basis. "How were you actually wounded?" Sarah asked, her medical training making her want to understand the exact nature of Jake's injury. "We encountered a patrol of 3 enemy fighters about 2 miles from the extraction point," Marcus explained. "We tried to avoid them, but they spotted us and opened fire. Jake took a knife wound during the hand-to-hand combat that followed." Jake nodded grimly. "One of the fighters got close enough to engage me with a combat knife. I managed to neutralize the threat, but not before he inflicted the wound that brought us to your hospital." Sarah realized that the training accident story they had initially told was a complete fabrication designed to protect both their mission and the hospital staff. The reality was that Jake had been wounded in actual combat while gathering intelligence that could save American lives. "What happened to the intelligence you gathered?" Sarah asked. "Was the mission successful despite your injury?" Marcus smiled for the first time since they had arrived at the cabin. "The mission was a complete success. We delivered everything to our command, and the terrorist cell's plans have been disrupted. Jake's injury was unfortunate, but the intelligence we gathered will prevent attacks that could have killed hundreds of people." Sarah felt a deep sense of pride in her role in Jake's rescue and recovery. She had not only saved the life of a Navy SEAL, but she had also played a part in a mission that would protect innocent lives from terrorist attacks. Over the next several hours, Sarah monitored Jake's recovery while learning more about his background and career. She discovered that he had been a Navy SEAL for 8 years and had served on dozens of classified missions around the world. Despite the dangerous nature of his work, he maintained a sense of humor and optimism that made him an excellent patient. "Sarah, I have a confession to make," Jake said as she checked his surgical site for the 4th time that night. "When Marcus and I first arrived at your hospital, I didn't think we would find anyone who could help us. Most civilian medical personnel wouldn't have been able to handle the kind of injury I had, especially with limited equipment." Sarah was pleased by Jake's acknowledgement of her skills, but she was also curious about his expectations. "What would you have done if we hadn't been able to help you at the hospital?" "We had backup plans," Marcus answered from across the room, where he was monitoring communications equipment. "There are military medical facilities we could have reached, but using them would have compromised the security of our mission." Jake continued the explanation. "When you suggested using broken glass as surgical instruments, I honestly thought you were either crazy or desperate. But when I saw how carefully you prepared the tools and how confidently you explained the technique, I realized that you actually knew what you were doing." Sarah laughed at his honesty. "To be completely truthful, I was terrified that my idea wouldn't work. I had studied the technique in theory, but I had never seen it used in practice. You were essentially my first test case." "Well, you passed the test with flying colors," Jake said. "The glass instruments worked better than some of the conventional tools I've seen used in military field hospitals." As dawn began to break over the mountains, Sarah completed another round of vital sign checks and medical assessments. Jake's recovery was progressing perfectly, with no signs of infection, bleeding, or other complications. His strength was returning steadily, and his pain levels were manageable with medication. "Jake, I think you're going to make a complete recovery," Sarah announced with satisfaction. "The surgical repairs are healing excellently, and your body is responding well to the treatment." Jake sat up carefully and swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Sarah, I can't express how grateful I am for everything you've done. You took enormous risks to save my life, and you've provided better medical care than I could have received anywhere else." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride and accomplishment as she realized that she had successfully completed her first major medical challenge. She had saved a life, learned new skills, and discovered abilities she didn't know she possessed. "Jake, this experience has taught me what I'm really capable of as a nurse," Sarah said. "I came into this as a rookie who was unsure about her abilities. I'm leaving as someone who knows she can handle whatever challenges come her way." Marcus approached with a serious expression. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next. Jake is stable enough to travel, and we need to report back to our command for debriefing. The question is what we do about your involvement in this situation." Sarah realized that she was at another decision point. She could return to her normal life at the hospital, proud of her role in saving Jake's life but returning to routine nursing duties. Or she could explore opportunities to use her newly discovered skills in more challenging and meaningful ways. "What options do I have?" Sarah asked. Jake and Marcus exchanged glances before Jake answered. "Sarah, people with your skills and ability to think under pressure are exactly what special operations medical support teams need. If you're interested, we could arrange for you to receive additional training and potentially join teams that provide medical support for classified missions." Sarah felt her heart racing as she considered this unexpected opportunity. She could remain a hospital nurse with an incredible story to tell, or she could become part of a world where her skills would be used in life or death situations on a regular basis. Would I still be a nurse? Sarah asked. You would be a nurse, but a very special kind of nurse, Marcus explained. You would receive advanced training in combat medicine, field surgery, and emergency techniques. You would be part of teams that save lives in situations where conventional medical care isn't available. Sarah thought about everything she had learned about herself over the past day. She had discovered that she was capable of much more than routine patient care. She had proven that she could think creatively, work under extreme pressure, and take responsibility for life or death decisions. I'm interested, Sarah said decisively. This experience has shown me that I want to be challenged and to use my skills in situations where I can make a real difference. Jake smiled broadly. Sarah, I think you're going to love this work. And I think you're going to save a lot of lives. As the sun rose fully over the mountains, casting the cabin in warm golden light, Sarah realized that her life as a rookie nurse was over. Her new life as a specialized medical professional who could handle anything was just beginning. 6 months later, Sarah graduated at the top of her class from the Navy's Advanced Combat Medical Training Program. She was assigned to a Special Operations Support Team, where she used her skills to save lives in some of the most challenging and dangerous situations in the world. And, whenever she faced a particularly difficult medical challenge, she remembered the Christmas Eve when she saved a Navy SEAL's life using broken glass and discovered that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined possible.